The kiss at Logan Airport felt rehearsed. Tessa pressed her lips against mine with the mechanical precision of someone checking items off a list. Her Chanel perfume hung in the humid September air between us, the same scent she'd worn since our wedding 8 years ago. Back then, it drove me wild. Now it just reminded me of lies wrapped in expensive packaging. "I'll miss you, Wes," she said, adjusting her designer luggage strap. The Louis Vuitton bag looked heavy enough to contain a small person. For a weekend in Napa with the girls, she'd packed like she was moving to California permanently. "Have fun with the wine tasting," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Don't drink too much Pinot Grigio." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You know me too well." Actually, I knew her well enough to know she hated Pinot Grigio. Always had. But I wasn't about to correct her now. Tessa wheeled her suitcase toward the terminal entrance, her heels clicking against the concrete with military precision. I watched her disappear through the automatic doors, then sat in my Honda Civic for exactly 17 minutes, long enough for her to clear security if she was actually taking the flight to San Francisco. She'd shown me on her phone. My investigator, Rosie Chen, a former Boston PD detective who now specialized in matrimonial surveillance, had positioned herself at Gate B7. The text came through at 11:47 a.m. "Target boarded American 2847 to Miami, not San Francisco. Repeat, Miami." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Miami, not Napa Valley, not wine country with her college girlfriends Sarah and Jennifer, who, according to their Instagram accounts, were currently posting pictures of themselves at a vineyard 3,000 miles away from Florida. The AirTag I'd planted in her toiletry bag 6 weeks ago had been my insurance policy. Call it paranoia, call it intuition, call it the growing certainty that my wife had been lying to me about more than just her weekend plans. The small device nestled between her expensive moisturizers and prescription bottles had cost me $29. Best investment I'd ever made. I pulled out of the airport pickup lane and headed home to our house in Newton, a suburb that real estate agents described as charming and mortgage brokers described as expensive. Tessa had insisted on the location when we'd bought the place 5 years ago. Close to her pharmaceutical sales territory, she'd said. Easy commute to her office downtown. Our house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees and the kind of neighbors who minded their own business until something interesting happened. Then they became amateur journalists. I had a feeling they'd get plenty of material soon enough. Inside, the silence felt different, heavier. Tessa's absence usually brought relief. No constant chatter about sales quotas and office politics, no reality television shows playing at volumes that could wake the recently unconscious. But today, the quiet carried weight. I opened my laptop and checked the AirTag location. The signal showed movement along I-95 south. She was already airborne, heading toward whatever waited for her in Miami. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek, my younger brother. "Beer tonight? Molly's working late." Derek had married his college sweetheart and somehow managed to build the kind of relationship that made other people believe in true love. They fought about normal things, whose turn it was to take out the trash, whether to get a dog, where to spend Christmas. Not about secret trips to Florida or mysterious charges on credit card statements. "Rain check," I texted back. "Working on something." "Everything okay?" I stared at the question for a long time before typing, "Ask me tomorrow." The AirTag signal had stabilized. Coral Gables, Florida. An address on Alhambra Circle that Google Street View showed as a sprawling Mediterranean-style house with a circular driveway and enough palm trees to stock a resort. The property had sold 3 months ago for $2.3 million, according to public records. The buyer was listed as Meridian Holdings LLC, a company that existed only on paper and in the imagination of whoever had filed the incorporation documents in Delaware. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Tessa and I had shared thousands of meals and conversations. The chair across from me was pushed in, exactly where she used to sit scrolling through emails while pretending to listen. Where we'd planned our future, discussed having children someday, argued about money and work and all the mundane details that fill up a marriage. The coffee tasted bitter, sharper than usual, but I drank it anyway, letting the heat ground me. Outside, the afternoon was calm and bright. Mrs. Patterson from next door was walking her ancient golden retriever, the dog's pace slow and deliberate, tail wagging as if nothing in the world required urgency. Normal life continuing its normal pace while my world quietly came apart. My phone rang at 3:15 p.m. Unknown number, but the area code was 616, local. I watched it buzz on the table for a second longer than necessary before answering. "Is this Wes Farrow?" The voice belonged to a man, nervous but determined, the kind of tension that comes from rehearsing a conversation you don't want to have. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Jace Arnell. I think we need to talk." Jace Arnell looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. We met at Murphy's Pub in downtown Boston, a place dark enough to hide red eyes and quiet enough for conversations you didn't want overheard. The air smelled like old wood and stale beer. He ordered whiskey neat and drank half of it before speaking, his hand shaking just slightly as he set the glass down. "Your wife works in pharmaceutical sales," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. So does mine, Rhea. Ever heard that name?" I had. Tessa mentioned Rhea occasionally, a colleague who worked the Southern Territories while Tessa handled New England. They'd attended conferences together, shared war stories about difficult doctors and impossible sales targets, names I'd never had reason to question. "They work for the same company," I said. Jace nodded and pulled out his phone. The screen showed a map with a red dot pulsing in Coral Gables, bright and undeniable. "I've been tracking my wife for 2 months. Started when I found charges for hotels in cities where she claimed to be working, but the company had no record of business trips." "How are you tracking her?" "Phone app. She doesn't know I have access." He drained the rest of his whiskey and exhaled slowly. "Where's your wife supposed to be this weekend?" "Napa Valley, wine tasting with college friends." "Rhea told me she was visiting her sister in Portland. Her sister lives in Denver and I called to check." Jace's laugh held no humor, just disbelief edged with pain. "They're both at the same address in Florida, same house, same pool, same lie." I signaled the bartender for another round, my hand moving on autopilot. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see clearly, but couldn't stop assembling. "How long have you been married?" I asked. 12 years. You?" 8. "Any kids?" "No. You?" 2 daughters. 10 and 7. His voice cracked slightly, just enough to notice. "They think mommy travels for work, which I guess she does, just not the kind of work they understand." We sat in silence for a moment, the clink of ice and low murmur of voices filling the space between us. 2 men contemplating the wreckage of their assumptions. The bar around us hummed with normal Friday afternoon conversations, office workers complaining about their bosses, college students planning weekend adventures, couples arguing about dinner plans, regular problems, manageable problems. "I hired a private investigator," Jace said, "former FBI. She found some interesting things about that house in Coral Gables." "Such as?" "It's owned by a shell company called Meridian Holdings. Same company that bought a vacation property in the Berkshires last year. Property that used to belong to someone named Wes Farrow." The whiskey turned to acid in my stomach. Our cabin in Lenox, the place where Tessa and I had spent our honeymoon, where we'd talked about growing old together, had been sold without my knowledge. The deed transfer had required both our signatures, but I'd never signed anything. "That's impossible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, memory surfaced. The stack of papers Tessa had brought home in March. Insurance documents, she'd said. Routine updates to our property coverage. I'd signed them while watching a Red Sox game, barely glancing at the pages, trusting my wife to handle the details. My investigator can prove it, Jace said. Question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Tessa in that Miami house, probably lounging by the pool without a care in the world. Thought about our joint bank accounts and retirement funds, all the assets we'd built together that she apparently considered her personal piggy bank. I want to know everything, I said. Every detail, every transaction, every lie. Jace smiled for the first time since sitting down. Good, because I've got a lot to show you. He opened a tablet and pulled up a folder labeled Evidence. Bank statements, travel records, phone logs, photographs. The digital trail of 2 marriages dissolving in real time. Rhea's been moving money for 18 months, he said, scrolling through account summaries. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers, always timed to her business trips. Where's it going? Cryptocurrency wallets, Bitcoin, Ethereum, some smaller coins I'd never heard of. Once it's converted, it's virtually impossible to trace. I studied the numbers. Thousands of dollars at first, then tens of thousands. The pattern was methodical, patient. This wasn't impulsive behavior, it was a carefully planned operation. How much total? From our accounts? About 400,000 so far. But that's just what I can document. Jace switched to another screen. Your wife's been busier. The spreadsheet showed transactions from accounts I recognized. Our checking, savings, and investment portfolios. Transfers I'd never authorized in amounts that should have triggered bank notifications. But the notifications would have gone to our shared email account, the one Tessa managed because she was better with financial details. 890,000, I said, reading the total at the bottom of the screen. That's just the beginning. My investigator thinks this goes deeper than 2 wives stealing from their husbands. Deeper how? Jace closed the tablet and leaned forward. The FBI is watching that house in Coral Gables, has been for 3 months. Whatever our wives are doing down there, it's big enough to attract federal attention. The bar suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too normal for the conversation we were having. I needed air, space to think, time to process the magnitude of what I was learning. I have to go, I said, standing up. Wait. Jace grabbed my arm. We're stronger together on this. They've been planning and coordinating. We should do the same. He was right. Tessa and Rhea had the advantage of information and preparation. They'd been working as a team while Jace and I stumbled around in the dark, trying to understand what was happening to our lives. What do you propose? My investigator has contacts in federal law enforcement. People who might be interested in what we've discovered. Jace's eyes hardened. Our wives want to play games with other people's money? Let's see how they handle playing with the government's attention. Rosie Chen's office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in Somerville, the kind of space that attracted private investigators, bail bondsmen, and lawyers who specialized in cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. Her door was unmarked, except for a number, 317, and a small security camera that tracked visitors from the elevator to her threshold. She buzzed us in without ceremony. Rosie was compact and efficient, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of direct stare that made guilty people confess before she asked questions. Her office walls were covered with certificates, commendations, and photographs from her 20-year career with Boston PD. Gentlemen, she said, gesturing to 2 chairs facing her desk. I've been busy since our conversation yesterday. Jace and I had called her from Murphy's pub, explaining what we'd discovered about our wives and the Coral Gables connection. She'd listened without interruption, then told us to meet her this morning with copies of all our financial records. The house your wives are staying in has an interesting history, Rosie began, opening a thick folder. Purchased 3 months ago by Meridian Holdings LLC for $2.3 million cash. No mortgage, no financing, no paper trail beyond the shell company registration. She spread out property records, incorporation documents, and surveillance photographs across her desk. The papers landed with practiced precision, overlapping just enough to suggest connections without obscuring details. The desk itself was scarred with old scratches, the kind that came from years of cases like this, messy, human, unresolved. The images showed the Mediterranean house from multiple angles: street view, aerial shots, close-ups of the pool area where two figures in bathing suits were clearly visible. "That's Tessa," I said, pointing to one of the figures. My finger hovered just above the glossy surface. Even from a distance, I recognized her posture, the way she held her shoulders when she thought she looked attractive, the unconscious tilt of her head I'd seen in 100 vacation photos. "And that's Rhea," Jace added, his voice tight with anger. He didn't point, just stared, jaw clenched, as if saying her name aloud might break something else inside him. "They're not alone," Rosie said, sliding another photograph across the desk. Her movements were calm, almost gentle, as if cushioning the impact. This one showed a man in his 40s, tall and lean, with the kind of artificially perfect smile that belonged in pharmaceutical sales brochures. He was standing by the pool, drink in hand, looking very much at home, sunburned in that careless way that suggested leisure, not work. "Evan Cross," I said, the name coming out flat. I recognized him instantly. Tessa's regional manager. She'd mentioned him frequently over the past year, praising his leadership, quoting his business philosophy, attending his strategy meetings that seemed to run late into the evening. I remembered nodding along, never questioning why his name came up so often. "You know him?" Rosie asked. "He's my wife's boss, supposed to be married with 2 kids in Brookline." "Supposed to be, yes." Rosie pulled out another document, the paper whispering softly as it slid free. "But his wife filed for divorce 6 weeks ago, and his kids are staying with their grandmother while the custody arrangement gets sorted out." She didn't look at us when she continued. "Mr. Cross has been having financial difficulties. His company is under investigation for Medicare fraud, and his personal assets are frozen pending the outcome." The pieces were clicking together like tumblers in a lock. Each new fact settled into place with a dull, inevitable weight. Evan Cross needed money and had access to a network of pharmaceutical sales representatives who traveled constantly and managed their own expense accounts. Tessa and Rhea were perfect recruits, intelligent, ambitious women with access to their husbands' assets and the skills to move money without attracting immediate attention. "How deep does this go?" Jace asked. He leaned forward now, forearms on his knees, like he was bracing for impact. "Deeper than 2 cheating wives and their boss," Rosie replied. She reached into a folder and pulled out a laminated map. "The FBI task force tracking this operation believes Meridian Holdings is connected to at least 12 other shell companies, all involved in cryptocurrency money laundering. They're processing millions of dollars through a network of pharmaceutical sales representatives across the Southeast." She showed us a map with red pins marking locations in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Each pin was small, precise, unemotional. Each pin represented a property owned by one of the shell companies, each property purchased with cash in the past 18 months. It looked less like real estate and more like a tactical diagram. "Your wives aren't just having affairs," Rosie continued. "They're money mules in a federal investigation. The FBI has been building a case for 8 months, waiting for enough evidence to make arrests that will stick." I stared at the photographs of Tessa by the pool, her body relaxed, her expression open and unguarded. She looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Our marriage had been struggling, but I'd attributed it to work stress and the normal wear of time. I'd never imagined she was living a completely separate life, funded by our joint assets and built on systematic fraud. "What happens now?" I asked. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "The FBI is planning to move soon. They've been monitoring communications, tracking financial transactions, building profiles of everyone involved." Rosie's expression grew serious, the professional mask slipping just enough to show concern. "Including both of you." "Us?" Jace leaned forward. We're the victims here. From their perspective, you're married to the suspects. You have access to the same accounts, the same information, the same opportunities. They need to determine whether you're innocent spouses or willing participants. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. I became aware of the hum of the overhead lights, the faint noise of traffic outside. I'd been focused on Tessa's betrayal, the personal violation of trust and marriage vows. But this was bigger than adultery and financial theft. This was federal conspiracy, the kind of charges that destroyed lives and sent people to prison for decades. What do we need to do? I asked. Cooperate fully, provide complete financial records, answer every question honestly. Rosie paused, letting the words settle. And decide whether you want to be witnesses or defendants when this comes apart. She handed each of us a business card with a phone number written on the back. FBI Special Agent Patricia Valdez. She's the lead investigator on the task force. I've already told her about our conversation. You called the FBI? Jace's voice rose with panic, sharp and unsteady. I called a contact who happens to work for the FBI. There's a difference. Rosie's tone remained calm, unflinching. Agent Valdez has been hoping someone close to the operation would come forward. Spouse testimony is powerful evidence, especially when it's voluntary. I looked at the business card, the edges crisp, the ink dark. I thought about Tessa in that Miami house, probably planning her next move while I sat in a private investigator's office contemplating cooperation with federal law enforcement. The woman I'd married, the person I'd trusted with my future, had become a stranger involved in crimes I was still struggling to understand. How long do we have to decide? I asked. Agent Valdez expects your call by Monday morning. After that, she'll have to assume you're not interested in cooperation. Rosie gathered the photographs and documents back into her folder, the evidence disappearing piece by piece. Gentlemen, your wives made their choice months ago. Now you need to make yours. Agent Patricia Valdez had the kind of voice that suggested she'd heard every lie, excuse, and sob story in the Federal Law Enforcement Handbook. She listened to my explanation without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification on dates, amounts, or specific details about Tessa's behavior patterns. Mr. Farrow, I appreciate you reaching out, she said when I finished. We've been monitoring the Coral Gables operation for several months, but insider information is always valuable. What exactly is my wife involved in? A sophisticated money laundering network using pharmaceutical sales representatives as couriers and processors. They exploit the industry's travel patterns and expense account structures to move illicit funds through cryptocurrency exchanges. I was sitting in my home office looking out at the backyard where Tessa and I had planned to install a garden this spring. The project had been postponed indefinitely when she'd started traveling more frequently for work. Now I understood why her schedule had become so demanding. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, $12 to $15 million over the past 18 months. Your wife and Mrs. Morick are significant players, but they're not running the operation. Evan Cross? Mr. Cross is middle management. The real architects are based in Miami and have connections to several international cryptocurrency exchanges that don't ask uncomfortable questions about the source of funds. Agent Valdez explained the mechanics of the operation with clinical precision. Pharmaceutical representatives would receive cash payments from various sources, some legitimate, some decidedly not. They'd convert the cash to cryptocurrency using exchanges that required minimal identification verification. The digital currency would then be transferred through a series of wallets designed to obscure the money trail, eventually ending up in accounts controlled by the network's leadership. The beauty of the scheme is that pharmaceutical salespeople travel constantly and handle large amounts of cash for legitimate business purposes, she continued. A sales representative carrying $10,000 in expense money doesn't attract attention. A sales representative carrying $10,000 in cash to convert to Bitcoin is just being innovative with their investment strategy. And the houses? The properties owned by shell companies? Safe houses, meeting locations, and storage facilities. The Coral Gables property serves multiple functions. It's where the network leadership coordinates operations, where money gets processed, and where participants can meet without attracting local attention. I thought about Tessa's increased travel schedule, her new interest in cryptocurrency investments, her insistence on managing our joint financial accounts. Every change in her behavior over the past year suddenly made sense when viewed through the lens of criminal conspiracy. What happens to the money they've already taken from our accounts? That depends on several factors, including your willingness to cooperate with our investigation. Agent Valdez's tone became more formal. The Bureau is prepared to offer immunity from prosecution in exchange for your testimony and assistance in building our case. Immunity from what? I didn't know anything about this. Mr. Farrow, your wife has been using joint accounts to fund criminal activity. From a legal standpoint, you had equal access to those accounts and equal responsibility for how the money was used. A prosecutor could argue that you were willfully ignorant or actively complicit. The implications hit me like cold water. Not only had Tessa stolen our money and betrayed our marriage, she'd potentially made me an accessory to federal crimes. Every joint account, every shared asset, every financial decision we'd made together could be viewed as evidence of my participation in money laundering. What kind of cooperation are you looking for? Complete financial records, detailed timeline of your wife's activities and behavior changes, access to her personal communications if possible, and eventually, testimony before a federal grand jury. I walked to the window and looked out at our quiet suburban street. Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden, probably wondering why Tessa's car hadn't been in the driveway for the past few days. Normal neighborhood concerns about normal neighborhood problems. If I cooperate, what happens to Tessa? That depends on the extent of her involvement and her willingness to cooperate as well. The Bureau is more interested in the network leadership than the individual participants, but everyone involved will face consequences. And if I don't cooperate? Then you'll likely face federal charges along with your wife when we make arrests. Money laundering, conspiracy, tax evasion. The potential penalties are substantial. Agent Valdez gave me 24 hours to decide. She also provided a secure email address where I could send financial records and a direct phone number for emergency contact. The conversation ended with a reminder that the investigation was active and ongoing, which meant I shouldn't discuss it with anyone except my attorney. I sat in the silence of my empty house, thinking about the choice between loyalty to my wife and self-preservation. Tessa had made her decision without considering how it would affect me. She'd risked our future, our assets, and my freedom for whatever payoff Evan Cross and his criminal network had offered. My phone buzzed with a text message. Having wonderful time, weather perfect, miss you, love T. The message came with a photo of a tropical sunset, palm trees silhouetted against orange and pink sky. It looked like a postcard from paradise, sent by someone who had no idea that federal agents were building a case that would destroy everything she'd worked to create. I deleted the message without responding. Tomorrow, I would call Agent Valdez and begin the process of saving myself from the wreckage of my marriage. Tonight, I would sit in our kitchen and drink coffee and try to remember what it felt like to trust the person you loved most in the world. I called my attorney, Michael Brennan, at 7 a.m. Monday morning. The sky outside was still gray, the kind of half-light that made everything feel unfinished, and my coffee sat untouched as the phone rang. Mike had handled our house purchase and will preparation, routine legal work for a routine marriage. This conversation would be different. I need to file for legal separation immediately, I said after explaining the situation in broad terms. I kept my voice steady, factual, stripping away anything that sounded emotional. And I need it served at a specific address in Florida. Mike was quiet for a long moment. I could hear papers shifting on his end, the soft exhale of someone recalibrating. Wes, are you sure about this approach? If Tessa is involved in federal crimes, serving separation papers might spook her into running. That's not my problem anymore. It could become your problem if she disappears with assets you're trying to recover. I'd considered that possibility more than once, lying awake at night replaying worst-case scenarios. But Agent Valdez had assured me that the FBI was monitoring the Coral Gables house closely. Tessa wouldn't be disappearing anywhere without federal law enforcement knowing about it, and that knowledge settled something tight in my chest. "Draw up the papers," I said. "I want them served today." Mike worked fast when properly motivated. By noon, he'd prepared a comprehensive separation agreement that froze all joint accounts, transferred sole ownership of our house to me, and established my claim to assets that had been moved without my knowledge or consent. I read every page carefully, line by line, the language cold and impersonal. The document was 23 pages of legal language that essentially meant Tessa Farrow was no longer entitled to spend my money on her criminal enterprises. The process server was a retired Boston police officer named Frank DeLuca, who specialized in difficult deliveries. He had a gravelly voice and the blunt efficiency of someone who'd seen every kind of bad reaction imaginable. He charged extra for out-of-state service, but he guaranteed results. Mike provided him with the Coral Gables address, photographs of Tessa, and instructions to document everything with video and witnesses. "She's not going to be happy," Frank said, reviewing the paperwork. "That's the general idea." Frank left for Logan Airport at 2 p.m., carrying legal documents that would officially end my marriage and hopefully begin the process of recovering what Tessa had stolen. The house felt strangely quiet after that, as if it were holding its breath. I spent the afternoon organizing financial records for Agent Valdez, creating a timeline of Tessa's suspicious activities, and changing passwords on every account I could access. Each reset felt like reclaiming a small piece of ground. The call came at 4:17 p.m. "Some man came by, says he's your lawyer. What's going on?" Tessa's voice was tight with panic, higher pitched than normal. In the background, I could hear other voices, Rhea arguing with someone, a man's voice I didn't recognize, the muffled echo of a large, open house. "Relax," I said, keeping my tone casual. "It's just the separation." "Separation? What separation?" "Wes, what are you talking about?" "The legal separation. You know, the document that says we're not married anymore and you can't spend my money on your Florida vacation." Silence. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "You can't do this. You can't just, this is crazy. I'm coming home." "Actually, you can't come home. I changed the locks this morning. Your stuff is in storage. The address is in the paperwork Frank gave you." "Frank? Who's Frank?" "The process server. Nice guy. Former cop. He said you answered the door in a bathing suit, which seems inappropriate for a business meeting, but I'm sure you had your reasons." More silence. I could picture Tessa standing in that Miami house, probably by the pool, phone clenched in her hand, trying to process how her carefully planned operation had suddenly been complicated by her husband's inconvenient legal action. "Wes, listen to me. There's been a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can. Save it for your lawyer." "My lawyer? I don't need a lawyer. We can work this out. I'll come home tonight and we'll talk." "Actually, you might want to call a lawyer, preferably one who specializes in federal criminal defense." The line went quiet except for background noise. Voices overlapping, a door slamming, what sounded like someone having a heated conversation in another room. Federal criminal defense? Tessa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah. Turns out money laundering is a federal crime. Who knew?" I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt calmer than I had in weeks. For months, Tessa had held all the cards, information, planning, resources, and the advantage of my ignorance. Now she knew that I knew, and she was the one operating in the dark. My phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. After the sixth call, I turned off the ringer and went to the kitchen to make dinner. The voicemails, when I finally listened to them, told the story of Tessa's afternoon in real time. Panic, anger, bargaining, threats, and finally a kind of desperate confusion as she realized that her husband had become an active opponent rather than a passive victim. Wes, please call me back. We need to talk about this rationally. You're making a huge mistake. You don't understand what you're doing. I'm coming home tonight whether you like it or not. You can't keep me out of my own house. Fine. Don't answer. But this isn't over. I have lawyers too. The final message was different. Quieter, more calculating. We should meet somewhere neutral. Talk this through like adults. There are things you don't know, things that could help both of us. Call me. I deleted all the messages without responding. Tessa was right about one thing. There were definitely things I didn't know, but I was learning fast, and I had better teachers than she realized. Agent Valdez called at 8 p.m. Interesting development this afternoon, she said. Our surveillance team reports significant activity at the Coral Gables location, multiple phone calls, heated discussions, and what appeared to be an emergency meeting. My wife received separation papers today. So we observed. How did she react? About as well as you'd expect someone to react when their criminal conspiracy gets interrupted by divorce proceedings. Agent Valdez chuckled. Mr. Farrow, I think you're going to make an excellent witness. Tessa came home 3 days later. I was sitting at our kitchen table with coffee and the morning paper when I heard her key in the front door lock. The key turned, but the door didn't open. She tried again, then again, with increasing frustration. Finally, she started pounding on the door. Wes, open this door right now! I finished reading an article about the Red Sox's playoff chances before walking to the front hallway. Through the peephole, I could see Tessa standing on our porch with her Louis Vuitton luggage and an expression that could have melted steel. The locks have been changed, I called through the door. I mentioned that on the phone. This is my house, too. You can't lock me out. Actually, I can. Check the separation agreement. You signed it. I didn't sign anything. Frank says you did. He has video. I heard her rustling through papers, probably the legal documents Frank had served at the Coral Gables house. After a few minutes, the pounding stopped. I want to get my things, she said, her voice calmer but still tight with anger. Your personal items are in storage. The address and access code are in the paperwork. What about my clothes? My jewelry? Storage unit. My car? In the driveway. Keys are under the mat. More silence. I could picture her calculating options, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that had spun completely away from her management. Wes, please, let me in. We need to talk. We can talk through the door. This is ridiculous. I'm your wife. Actually, you're my estranged wife involved in federal money laundering charges. There's a difference. I heard her sit down on the porch steps. The wood creaked under her weight, a familiar sound that suddenly felt foreign, followed by the soft thud of a suitcase being set down. Through the front window, I could see the edge of one expensive bag, the leather scuffed from being dragged across concrete. Our neighbors would be getting quite a show, the pharmaceutical sales executive locked out of her own house by her husband, surrounded by expensive luggage and legal documents. How long have you known? She asked finally. Her voice carried through the screen door, lower than usual, stripped of the polished confidence she used on clients. About the money laundering? A few days? About the affair with Evan Cross? Longer. It's not what you think. She said it quickly, reflexively, like a line she'd practiced in the car. Really? What do I think? You think I'm some kind of criminal. You think I've been stealing from you and lying about everything. I opened the door and looked at my wife through the screen. The late afternoon light caught in her hair, turning it almost golden. She was still beautiful, the same blonde hair and green eyes that had attracted me at a pharmaceutical conference 8 years ago. But something had changed in her face, a hardness around the eyes that I'd been too trusting to notice before. The familiar smile never quite reached them anymore. "Haven't you?" I asked. Tessa stood up and moved closer to the screen door. I could smell her perfume through the mesh, the same one she'd worn for years, now oddly out of place. "It's complicated." "Explain it to me." She took a breath, steadying herself, slipping into presentation mode. "The pharmaceutical industry is changing. Sales territories are shrinking, quotas are increasing, and companies are cutting representatives every quarter. I needed to diversify my income streams. By laundering money for criminals? By providing financial services for clients who needed discretion." Her chin lifted slightly, daring me to argue with the phrasing. I almost laughed. "Financial services? Is that what you call it? Wes, listen to me. The money we moved wasn't stolen. It was legitimate business income that needed to be processed through alternative channels for tax optimization purposes." "Tax optimization. That's a new one." Tessa pressed her face against the screen, distorting her features slightly, desperation bleeding through the practiced calm. "I was trying to secure our future. Build a nest egg that would let us retire early, travel, maybe start a family. By committing federal crimes. By being smart about opportunities that other people were too scared to pursue." I studied her face, tracing the lines I'd memorized over years of shared mornings and late nights. I looked for some sign of the woman I'd married, the person who'd worried about paying our mortgage on time, who'd insisted on contributing to our retirement accounts every month, who'd talked about teaching our children the importance of honesty and hard work. I couldn't find her anymore. "How much money did you steal from our accounts?" I asked. "I didn't steal anything. I invested it." "In cryptocurrency wallets controlled by your boyfriend and his criminal network." "Evan isn't my boyfriend. He's my business partner." "Right. Business partners who share hotel rooms and vacation houses." Tessa's composure finally cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and brittle. "You don't understand anything. You sit in your little office building fixing computer problems for small businesses while the world changes around you. I saw an opportunity to make real money, serious money, and I took it." "With our money, without telling me. Because you would have said no. You would have been too scared, too conservative, too worried about following rules that don't make sense anymore." I looked at my wife, my estranged wife, standing on our porch defending her decision to risk everything we'd built together for the chance to make easy money with criminals. She was right about one thing. I would have said no. I would have been terrified of the legal consequences, the moral implications, the simple wrongness of stealing other people's assets. "The FBI offered me immunity in exchange for cooperation," I said. Tessa's face went pale, the color draining so fast it startled me. "You talked to the FBI?" "I'm talking to the FBI. There's a difference." "What did you tell them?" "Everything I know, which, thanks to you, is quite a lot." She gripped the screen door frame, knuckles whitening. "Wes, you don't understand what you're doing. These people don't forgive and forget. If you cooperate with federal law enforcement, there will be consequences." "For who?" "For both of us." I considered that possibility. Evan Cross and his network had millions of dollars at stake and the kind of connections that could make life difficult for people who caused problems. But they also had the FBI watching their every move, and federal agents were generally better at protecting witnesses than criminals were at intimidating them. "I'll take my chances," I said. Tessa stepped back from the door, as if the distance might protect her. "This isn't over." "Actually, it is. The marriage is over. The joint accounts are frozen. Your access to our assets is terminated." I paused, letting the words settle. "Oh, and you might want to call that criminal defense attorney. The FBI is planning to make arrests soon." She picked up her luggage and walked to her car without another word. I watched from the window as she loaded her bags, slammed the trunk harder than necessary, started the engine, and backed out of our driveway for the last time. The house felt different after she left. Quieter, but also lighter. The silence wasn't empty. It was clean. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what Tessa was really doing or where she was actually going. I knew exactly where she was going. To a lawyer's office, then probably back to Miami to help Evan Cross figure out how to minimize the damage from a federal investigation that was closing in fast. I poured another cup of coffee and called Agent Valdez. "She's gone," I said. "We know. Our surveillance team is following her." "What happens now?" "Now we wait for her to make the next move. People under this kind of pressure usually make mistakes." I hoped Tessa would make her mistakes quickly. I was tired of waiting, tired of wondering, tired of being married to someone I no longer recognized or trusted. The kitchen table where we'd had our final conversation would need to be replaced eventually. It held too many memories of better times, when we'd actually been partners instead of adversaries. But for now, it served as a reminder of how completely our life together had fallen apart, and how ready I was to start building something new from the pieces that remained. The FBI field office in Boston occupied several floors of a downtown building that looked like it housed insurance companies and accounting firms. Agent Valdez met me in the lobby at 9 a.m. sharp, wearing a dark suit and the kind of expression that suggested she'd been awake since 5 reviewing case files. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Farrow," she said, leading me through security checkpoints and metal detectors. "We have a lot to discuss." Her office was functional rather than comfortable, standard government furniture, fluorescent lighting, and walls covered with organizational charts that mapped criminal networks like corporate hierarchies. She offered coffee from a machine that had seen better decades. "Before we begin, I need to clarify your legal status," she said, opening a thick folder. "You're here voluntarily as a potential witness, not as a suspect or target of our investigation. However, that status could change depending on what we discover about your knowledge of or participation in your wife's activities. I've told you everything I know. I believe you have. But we need to verify that information and explore some additional details." Agent Valdez pulled out a stack of financial documents. "These are records from your joint accounts going back 2 years. I'd like you to walk me through some specific transactions." The next 3 hours were a detailed examination of my financial life. Every large deposit, every unusual withdrawal, every transfer between accounts had to be explained and documented. Agent Valdez was particularly interested in transactions that coincided with Tessa's business trips, looking for patterns that might indicate my awareness of her money laundering activities. "This transfer of $15,000 to a cryptocurrency exchange," she said, pointing to a transaction from 6 months ago. "Do you remember authorizing this?" I studied the record. The transfer had been initiated from our joint checking account on a Tuesday in March, the same day Tessa had left for a pharmaceutical conference in Atlanta. "I didn't authorize it," I said, "but Tessa had access to all our accounts. The transfer required 2-factor authentication, a code sent to your phone." I thought back to that Tuesday. I'd been working on a network installation for a client in Cambridge, troubleshooting connection problems that had kept me busy all afternoon. Tessa had called several times with questions about our taxes, our insurance, routine financial matters that required my attention. "She called me that day," I said slowly, "asked me to confirm some numbers for our accountant. I might have given her the authentication code without realizing what it was for." Agent Valdez made notes. "This pattern repeats 17 times over 6 months. Always on days when your wife was traveling, always requiring authentication codes that you provided during phone conversations." The scope of Tessa's deception was becoming clearer. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd manipulated me into helping her steal it, using my trust and her knowledge of our financial routines to gain access to funds I never would have authorized for criminal purposes. Am I in legal trouble for this? I asked. That depends on several factors. The prosecution could argue that you were willfully ignorant or negligently complicit, but your cooperation with our investigation weighs heavily in your favor. Agent Valdez explained the immunity agreement the Bureau was prepared to offer. In exchange for my complete cooperation, financial records, testimony, and assistance with their ongoing investigation, I would receive immunity from prosecution for any crimes related to my wife's money laundering network. What does complete cooperation mean exactly? Full disclosure of everything you know or suspect about your wife's activities. Testimony before a federal grand jury. Possible testimony at trial if the case goes to court. She paused. And one additional element that could be particularly valuable to our investigation. Which is? Your wife doesn't know about this immunity agreement yet. She may try to contact you, either to negotiate or to threaten. If she does, we'd like you to record those conversations. The idea of recording Tessa felt like another betrayal, even though she'd already betrayed me in every way that mattered. But Agent Valdez was right. Tessa would likely try to contact me as the federal investigation closed in, and those conversations could provide evidence that no amount of surveillance or financial analysis could duplicate. What if she offers to cooperate too? She can certainly try. But immunity agreements are limited, and the Bureau prefers to work with witnesses who come forward voluntarily rather than those who cooperate only after getting caught. Agent Valdez handed me a document to review, the formal immunity agreement that would protect me from prosecution in exchange for my cooperation. The legal language was dense, but the practical meaning was clear. I could save myself by helping the FBI build their case against my wife and her criminal associates. How long do I have to decide? The investigation is moving quickly. We're planning arrests within the next 2 weeks, possibly sooner if circumstances require immediate action. She closed the folder. Mr. Farrow, your wife made her choice when she decided to risk your assets and your freedom for her criminal enterprise. Now, you need to make yours. I signed the immunity agreement that afternoon, after reviewing it with Mike Brennan and confirming that it provided the protection I needed. The document felt heavier than its actual weight, like I was signing away the last remnants of my marriage, along with my potential criminal liability. Agent Valdez provided me with a secure phone that would automatically record any conversations with Tessa or her associates. She also gave me detailed instructions on how to handle contact attempts, stay calm, ask questions, let them talk, and avoid saying anything that might warn them about the federal investigation. One more thing, she said as I prepared to leave. Your wife's criminal network has significant financial resources and connections that extend beyond what we've mapped so far. If you feel threatened or unsafe at any point, contact me immediately. I drove home through Boston traffic, thinking about the choice I'd just made. Tessa had gambled our future on a criminal enterprise that was now collapsing around her. I'd chosen self-preservation over loyalty to someone who'd already demonstrated that loyalty was a one-way street in our relationship. The secure phone Agent Valdez had given me sat on my kitchen counter like a small black reminder of how completely my life had changed. In 2 weeks, maybe less, federal agents would arrest my wife and her associates. The money they'd stolen would be seized, the properties would be confiscated, and the network that had seemed so sophisticated and profitable would be exposed as just another criminal conspiracy that got too greedy and attracted too much attention. I was safe. Tessa was not. And for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt like I was finally on the winning side of a game I'd never wanted to play. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning in October. I was drinking coffee and reading email when Agent Valdez called to inform me that federal agents had simultaneously raided locations in Florida, Georgia, and Massachusetts, arresting 14 people connected to the cryptocurrency money laundering network. Tessa was among them. She was taken into custody at the Coral Gables house at 6 a.m., Agent Valdez said, along with Evan Cross, Rhea Morick, and 3 other network participants who were meeting to discuss their response to your separation filing. What happens now? Initial appearances before federal magistrates, arraignment, bail hearings, the usual process for federal criminal cases. She paused. Your wife's attorney has already contacted our office about possible cooperation. I wasn't surprised. Tessa had always been quick to adapt to changing circumstances, and federal criminal charges definitely qualified as changed circumstances. But Agent Valdez had been right about the value of voluntary cooperation versus cooperation under pressure. I'd received immunity, while Tessa would be negotiating from a position of weakness. What kind of cooperation is she offering? Information about network leadership, financial records, details about operations we haven't uncovered yet. The standard package from someone trying to minimize their exposure. Will you accept it? That depends on what she can provide and how truthful she's willing to be. Federal prosecutors prefer multiple sources of information, especially in complex financial crimes. The news coverage began that afternoon. Local television stations reported the arrests as a major victory against international money laundering, with federal officials promising more arrests as the investigation continued. Tessa's name appeared in the reports as a pharmaceutical sales representative from Newton who allegedly processed hundreds of thousands of dollars through cryptocurrency exchanges. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters, neighbors, colleagues, friends who'd heard the news and wanted to know what I knew about my wife's criminal activities. I let everything go to voicemail and spent the evening reviewing the messages. Wes, this is Janet from Channel 5. We'd love to speak with you about your wife's arrest. Hi, it's Carol from next door. I saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Wes, Mike Brennan. Call me as soon as you get this. Don't talk to any reporters without me present. Derek's message was more direct. Holy hell, brother. What the heck happened? Call me. I called Derek first, explaining the situation in broad terms without mentioning my cooperation with the FBI investigation. He listened without interruption, then offered to come over with beer and moral support. I always thought Tessa was ambitious, he said. But money laundering? That's like something from a movie. Yeah, well, apparently the movie was based on a true story. Derek arrived an hour later with a 6-pack of Sam Adams and the kind of practical sympathy that only brothers can provide. We sat in my living room, drinking beer and watching news coverage of the arrests that had made my wife a federal criminal defendant. What happens to the house? He asked. It stays with me. The separation agreement protects assets that weren't involved in criminal activity. What about the money she stole? The government will try to recover what they can, but most of it is probably gone. Cryptocurrency is hard to trace once it's been moved through enough exchanges. Derek shook his head. 8 years of marriage, and she throws it all away for what? Easy money? Apparently. We watched television coverage of the Coral Gables raid, federal agents carrying boxes of evidence from the house where Tessa had spent her week away with the girls. The reporter mentioned that the property would be seized and sold to help compensate victims of the money laundering scheme. Are you a victim? Derek asked. Legally? Yes, practically, I'm not sure. I finished my beer and opened another. I lost money, but I also lost a marriage that was apparently built on lies. Hard to say which loss is more significant. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Important for both of us. Please call. I showed the message to Derek. Tessa? Probably. She's allowed phone calls while in custody. Are you going to respond? I thought about the secure recording device Agent Valdez had given me, still sitting in my kitchen drawer. Any conversation with Tessa could provide valuable evidence for the federal case, but it would also mean hearing her voice again, listening to whatever justifications or threats or bargaining positions she'd developed since her arrest. "Not tonight," I said. "Let her think about federal custody for a while first." Derek stayed until midnight, providing the kind of steady presence that helped normalize an abnormal situation. After he left, I sat in my quiet house and considered how completely my life had changed in the span of a few weeks. 3 months ago, I'd been married to a pharmaceutical sales representative who traveled frequently for work. Now I was divorced from a federal criminal defendant who'd stolen nearly $1 million from our joint accounts to fund a money laundering operation. The silence felt different than it had when Tessa was simply away on business trips. This was permanent silence, the absence of someone who would never be coming home again. But it wasn't lonely silence. It was peaceful, like the quiet after a storm has passed and you can finally assess the damage and begin repairs. I turned off the television and went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now. Tessa's side of the closet was empty, her personal items gone to storage or federal evidence lockers. The space looked larger without her presence, ready for whatever came next. 6 months later, Tessa's cooperation with federal prosecutors reduced her sentence to 18 months in minimum security prison and full asset forfeiture. Rhea received a similar sentence. Evan Cross, as a network leader, got 5 years in federal prison and permanent exclusion from the pharmaceutical industry. I received a check from the government for $127,000. Partial recovery of the money Tessa had stolen from our accounts. Not everything, but enough to rebuild my financial foundation and move forward with confidence. The divorce was finalized while Tessa was in federal custody. She didn't contest the terms. I kept the house, changed the locks again, and eventually replaced the kitchen table where we'd had our final conversation. The new table was smaller, suitable for 1 person or 2 people who actually trusted each other. The secure recording device went back to Agent Valdez, unused. Tessa never called. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd answered that text message, if I'd given her the chance to explain or threaten or bargain for my silence. But mostly, I'm grateful that I chose silence instead, the kind of silence that comes from walking away from people who view your trust as a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be treasured. Tessa had wanted a week away. She got 18 months away, plus the rest of her life away from the comfortable suburban existence she'd risked for easy money and criminal excitement. I got my life back, minus a wife who'd never really been the person I thought I'd married. Fair trade, all things considered. The forwarding address I provided to the post office was the same as always: my house, my name, my quiet street in Newton where neighbors minded their own business unless something truly interesting happened. Nothing interesting had happened in months. I preferred it that way.